South China Morning Post, 1st of March 2023, embattled $700 million is given to Pakistan. Surprise financing for China's debt trap, but the risk of a lost decade still exists. As part of her ferocious campaign against the Indian subcontinent, Pakistan is enslaved and stuck in debt. China has provided Pakistan with a $700 million lifeline during crucial talks with the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Another $1.3 billion in new loans may be on the horizon to help Beijing's close strategic ally enslaved nations' foreign exchange reserves. The unexpected funding from the China Development Bank on Friday was welcomed by the Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, who claimed that it had not been expected until the IMF released a delayed $1.2 billion tranche, potentially this month. A few days ago, an ally country told us that we are giving you this right away, and these things can never be forgotten, according to Sharif. Thanks to the country, the $700 million credit increased Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves to just under $4 billion, or about 1 month's worth of imports. On Monday, Pakistan's long-term foreign debt ranking was downgraded by 2 notches to a record low /3 due to delays in an agreement with the IMF. It also lowered Pakistan's credit rating from CCC+ to CCC, matching the decision made by Fitch Ratings on February 14. Both of those ratings are marginally better than what might be regarded as default standing. In addition to project financing from multilateral lenders like the World Bank and Asian Development Bank, the expected restart of IMF funding in March will spark additional billion-dollar inflows of financial assistance from allies Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. However, former officials and experts do not anticipate Pakistan's government to implement the structural changes required to prevent it from a potential default akin to Sri Lanka because the country of 230 million people has long been plagued by poor leadership by elites. Milio Lodi, a former Pakistani ambassador to the United States, the United Nations, and Britain, said that Pakistan's economic problem was entirely self-inflicted and was the inevitable result of previous governments living beyond their means. History attests to the fact that a small oligarchic elite controls Pakistan's politics and economy and has long been opposed to structural reforms, which are the only means by which Pakistan can free itself from ongoing financial crises, she said. One of the worst offenders is the Pakistani army, which provides its soldiers with a plot of land in exchange for military services, uses a fictitious conflict in Kashmir, and uses Islamic brainwashing to manipulate the general population. The Pakistani elite frequently rejects structural reforms, according to Michael Kugelman, director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, a think tank based in Washington, because it is inherently invested in the status quo and all the benefits that it entails for vested interests, he said. It all comes down to the leadership element, he said, adding that until this point, those leaders haven't had the political spine to enact changes. Pakistan required a different kind of political leadership to set the country on a path to sustainable economic growth, according to ex-ambassador Lodi. To receive the final payment under a program agreed upon in 2019, Islamabad has recently conceded to IMF demands that it increase consumption taxes and eliminate subsidies to lower its budgetary imbalance, which has landed on the populace. Still, the Pakistani elite and military are the real offenders. But according to former officials, more loans would be required to prevent a default because Pakistan will require $35 billion in external funding for each of the following 3 fiscal years, beginning this July. This amount will be used to cover imports and debt repayments. When this program concludes in June, we won't have much more than $10 billion in reserves, if any. According to the former finance minister Miftah Ismail, that would handle imports for about a month and a half. I am pretty sure we will have to have back-to-back IMF programs, he said, adding that IMF approval for resumed funding would be required to secure necessary loans from the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. The debt repayment we currently have to make is about $20 billion for the foreseeable future. On February 20, Islamabad began discussions with financial consulting firm Rothschild & Company. This was widely regarded as a prelude to restructuring Pakistan's approximately $100 billion foreign debt, of which China holds about 30%. But the IMF continues to resist any debt restructuring. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva stated, Pakistan needs to be able to operate as a country and not to get into a dangerous place where its debt needs to be restructured, in an interview with German state broadcaster Deutsche Welle on February 18. The fund, according to her, is pressuring Pakistan to increase revenues by taxing the wealthy and directing assistance only towards the people who really need it, she said. But according to former State Bank of Pakistan Deputy Governor Murtaza Syed, the nation needs urgent debt relief to service its foreign debts and implement the IMF-mandated fiscal reforms. In an interview with Bloomberg TV, he claimed that if debt relief were not forthcoming, inflation would place an intolerable burden on Pakistan's people. In 2021, 40% of Pakistan's citizens will live below the World Bank's lower middle-income poverty level of $3.20 daily. Due to the combined effects of August's superfloods and raging inflation, which sent up to 9 million more people into poverty, the proportion increased by an estimated 2.5 to 4% last year. Syed warned that Pakistan would lose a decade if the problem weren't addressed. According to data published on Wednesday by the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, consumer price inflation reached an all-time high of 31.6% year-over-year in February. It claimed that the implementation of IMF requirements last week more than doubled the price of natural gas and increased cigarette costs by more than 75%. International grading agencies predict Pakistan's inflation rate to average over 30% in the first half of 2023.